Okay, this is a short talk, and it's about achieving love wisdom through the cultivation of the 5 Ds. Intriguing, perhaps. Discipline, dispassion, discrimination, decentralization, and detachment. Sound like fun? Okay. So let's take a look at these necessary eliminations. Plus there's 4 more that are found in rays and initiations before we can really clear the way for the inflow of the kinds of energies we want. We have to get out of our own ways. So let's take a look one at a time, okay? I know you're familiar with these, it's just the doing of them, that's the hard part. So notice that when we take the word discipline, it's a very generic term. It's found in the word disciple. It's almost entirely included there. So what comes to your mind when you think of, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of discipline? Very good. Okay. Now, how exactly do we exercise discipline? You know, obviously these words have a lot of flow over each other, and they don't particularly apply to only one place in your energy system, some of them more so than others, but this term discipline can be applied to all the vehicles and the personality and everything, really. But let's apply it physically and not let the etheric, physical, elemental close down the more sensitive psyche. You know, it's an outer thing, and we have to do the right thing externally so that the good thing internally can occur. So this is a real, you know, there's a weight, there's a very Saturnian kind of thing that happens. It's a weight upon us. But if we get that straight, we want to all be open to the possibilities of the inner life. And, you know, Moria said that, you know, when have you ever become less through sacrifice? He might well have said, when have you ever become less through discipline? Every disciple, and we're, you know, presumably all trying to be that, has to go through this process of getting out of their own way, you know? Okay, so let's apply this to the etheric, physical, fundamental, and goodness, I'm Freudian-ing all over the place. Elemental, a fundamental elemental, okay. So now, dispassion. This, of course, seems to have more to do with the astral vehicle. What comes to your mind when you think of dispassion? What, perhaps a Ray 2 astral body instead of a Ray 6 astral body? How many admit to a Ray 6 astral body? Okay, keep working. So, how do we exercise dispassion? In a way, we do not desire what is transient and what is found in the world of phenomena. We get all worked up about evanescent things, transient things. The Buddha would have us avoid that kind of attitude, and I think we'll be hearing a lot about the four noble truths in this respect. So we'll be taking the Buddha's advice. His teaching on dispassion was powerful, and really, DK said he came very much with his 6-ray mind to conquer the factor of misdirected desire in humanity. So, you know, measure your desire nature, what's it oriented towards, and what are the adhesions which have to be removed because we probably all have them or we wouldn't be here right now. Okay, the next is another D, discrimination. This is a more mental factor in a way. So think of it just for a moment, discrimination. I think a term, you know, viveka, Sanskrit term, is applied here because we have very much to exercise it in an important way around the fourth initiation. Interestingly, it's not just an early thing. So how do we exercise this in our life? Are we discriminative? It's almost a word that has acquired a negative connotation, but as occultists in training, we have to have it. It's we're separating this from that, you know, with discrimination. It's an act of separation for clarification, an act of separation for clarification. So what's being mentally separated in your life so you can tell what they really are, distinct from each other. And we look at where that's found on the Tibetan's charts, and it's found just on the border of the concrete mind and the higher mental plane. And it helps us really determine, and it's not easy to do, what is of the personality and what is of the soul. We use the words all the time, but you know, what really is of the personality and what really is of the soul. And in a higher sense, if you look at the fourth initiation, it gives you planetary rulers for all of those things. It's Mercury and Saturn, which are found at the fourth degree, where you are really discriminating cosmically from the dense physical body of our planetary logos and his cosmic etheric body. And you know, things are alive on the cosmic etheric body, and in the dense levels, it's just the realm of effects, the lower 18 or 21 subplanes. So we try to discriminate that. We try to discriminate that from this in the old Vedanta terms, right? That is the one reality, seamless, homogeneous, indivisible, and this is whatever perception of the multitude of perceptions crosses our mind, discriminating that from this. Discrimination works all the way up. We'll have to discriminate, I mean, it's just going to keep going, okay? Even up to the ninth initiation and who knows beyond. So, you know, there's the form and the relatively formless, and there's the cosmic astral plane from the cosmic physical plane, and all those things that are beyond us, but discrimination will be at work. So do we discriminate clearly enough, and do we use Saturn and Mercury in such a way that we can really tell the difference between what's alive and what's not quite so alive? The dense physical body of our planetary God is a realm of effects, and yet we treat it as if it's reality, and it's not, and we have to discriminate accordingly, okay? So it's a mental thing, mental, intuitive, and it goes all the way up. Okay, here's another D for us. Love those Ds, you know, it's the fourth. You know, these mnemonics, DK uses them all the time. They are a number of words that start with the same letter, so you can group them together and really remember. You know, and I think that's really important, to remember series of descriptors which reveal to us a process which is necessary. So the next one is decentralization. Decentralization. So what comes to your mind when you think of decentralization? And how do we exercise that? You know, we all have a range of consciousness. We all have a field of consciousness. And so often the great unreality, which is the personal ego, is in the middle of it all, you know. I can never get out of my mind that Master Moria calls the ego a ball of fat. It kind of puts things in the proper place, you know. So it's about getting off the center of our own stage, and there are other things to concentrate upon within this ring pass knot of consciousness. And really, whatever this false identity, which is a very limited thing, has to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink until it just disappears, and then we will become what's called, in Leo language, the relinquished point. And then in our field of consciousness, there will be reality and not the false identity. So, you know, the little self has to shrink. And that's called decentralization, getting off the center of your own stage. The Tibetan said to one of his disciples, never for 1 minute do you forget yourself. Well, there's self-forgetfulness, and then there's self-remembering. There's a larger self to remember, while a little self is being forgotten. But if we struggle so hard to forget the little self, we're doing the little self thing. So we have to have a passionate interest in that which is not the little self. So maybe a preoccupation with the divine plan would help, and with the fate of humanity. And then the question is, are we thus preoccupied? Or are we always preoccupied with our little self? You know, it takes a little while to grow out of that, doesn't it? You know, if we can talk only about ourselves and how we feel and how things are impacting us and us and us, and meanwhile the whole world is on fire. So what's important and what's our priorities? Decentralization, that's the fourth thing. That's what the personality has to be subjected to. So far what I've got here is discipline for the physical body, though it's a broad term, dispassion for the astral body, discrimination for the mental body, and decentralization for the personality. Then there is the big word, detachment, and that just applies across the board, and that's one of the Buddha's big terms. So what comes to your mind when you think of detachment?
Like a letting go of everything.
It sounds good if I could hear it.
It's like a letting go of everything, freeing yourself up.
Letting go, you know, that's a good word. I once studied Zen only to discover it wasn't my path. Something about being hit on the head with a stick, you know, and not thinking. I know. Oh, you're thinking again, are you? Oh, we'll take care of you. No, okay. You know, for us Ray 3 types, it may not be the way. But anyway, letting go was the big word. Let go, let go. But what is it that's letting go? And what's being let go of? So it's a change of identification. You can't be detached unless you change your identification. I just did something to my screen, but I'm detached from it. Okay. So it's almost as if it's happening to someone else, you know, and that someone else is what we thought we were. And we pre-sinned, as they say. We stand back, we stand back. And, you know, I recognize my other self, and in the waning of that self, I grow and glow. It's the Gemini thing. The self divides. Of course, eventually, the rejected self becomes the reclaimed self, right? You never reject anything, ultimately. Just temporarily, for expeditious purposes. So it is the scientific approach recommended by Dr. Assagioli. You know, you look on at the customary self as if it was someone else, you know, and you look at it scientifically. So it's the observing consciousness. But what point of observation do you take? You know, I mean, there's something that's not the soul in incarnation, there's something that's the soul on its own plane, and there's something that's not the consciousness within the causal body. There's a non-local field called the spiritual triad, and there's the consciousness in that. And there's something called eventually the monad, or the spirit, where we're identified as one with everything. So what is your point from which you observe, and then reclaim, and then unify all your perceptions into one thing? So detachment is a really important word, and usually we think of it as the distinction between soul and personality, and that's a good start, you know. And of course, dispassion helps along with that. So if you could only see my screen, my computer has been telling me something. So the key with detachment, and I suppose books and books have been written about it, is both not to care and to care simultaneously. You know, it's one of those things like Alice Bailey had, where you are personally impersonal and impersonally personal. That's what we learned when we started our secretarial work. This, I care and I don't care. You know, the certain attitude of indifference. He says it's a great thing to cultivate, but on the other hand, I do care and I don't care. And can we contain the opposites of this? Can we contain the paradox of caring and not caring? There's this great Mahamaya. Every universe is a Mahamaya. It's going on forever and it will. And it is entirely us. From a deep perspective, this whole Mahamaya that we are participating in is entirely us, but apparently it's not us entirely. So, you know, there's a wisdom in paradox, and if you can see the contradictions, things will get more real and maybe unreal at the same time. So, look, it's the Mahamaya, which is the universe, and their infinitudinous instantiations of the universe, it's a great veil upon what we are, and yet what we are, being indivisible, think about that, the indivisibility of you cannot help but be entirely present at all moments in all the things from the very smallest to the largest. And that's like a great mystery. How do you put absolute infinity into Anu, the speck, without separating it at all? Well, you know, when you start to think in those non-personal terms, it's easier to detach and to look at what we thought was ourself before under a condition of mistaken identity as not ourself at all, and yet it is. So just get used to paradox, you know, and there is a certain logic in paradox and a certain revelation that comes with paradox. I sometimes think of reality as called the great paradox. So anyway, to the extent that our perceptions veil the soul, or veil the inner reality, the consciousness we have and that we are, detachment is utterly necessary if we're to live free and above the confinement of illusion. So what do we have? Discipline, dispassion, discrimination, decentralization, detachment, the 5 Ds. Now DK also tells us in the beginning of Rule 11, which is in Raise That Initiation, it's a big rule about the 4th initiation. You know, if we as a group could master that rule, then we would be taking the 4th initiation together as a group, and we're certainly a very long way from being able to do that. But, you know, I'm not going to read all this, but it's wonderful. Just go there into that book, and he talks about 4 destructions, 4 eliminations before you can even begin to think about applying the rule. And first of all, he wants you to kill out desire. It's the first destructive activity of the disciple. It's not what the disciple seeks or wants or desires that should condition him and drive him to what might be called ashramic acquiescence, but the all-impelling motive of world need. Okay, so kill out desire, preoccupation with world need, desire dies of attrition. So that's tough, isn't it? You know, the Buddha really concentrated on helping us kill out desire for the phenomenal world. On the other hand, we can't really eliminate desire because it's a cosmic principle, so we have to redirect and co-measure our desires. A big task. Now the next destruction is we have to destroy all the ties which link the personalities of the group members. Oops, okay. Right. Okay, these must be severed, and the relation between the group members must be on the basis of soul activity, joint pledge to the master of the ashram, and a united service given to humanity, and then a point of freedom will come. I'm not going to read all this, but it's very beautiful, and it gives us these injunctions about destructions we must undertake. After all, the 4th degree, interesting, 4 destructions and the 4th degree. Here's the cross in the heart in the 4th degree, and we have to prepare it through 4 destructions. Now that's the Pluto-Vulcan part of discipleship, and being inherently biased towards the second ray and towards attachment, we don't necessarily want to do that. That's the hard part. But if we identify as something else than that which is being destroyed, which is the truth, then in fact it's easier to carry out. Here's another good one. The third quality which must be utterly rooted out and destroyed. Now, you know, this is a nice second-ray disciple talking, right? Is that of all reaction towards recognition. Whether that recognition is accorded by the world of men, by other disciples, or by the master. The ability to work without any token of recognition, to see others claim the reward of action taken, and even to be unaware that the results of the good initiated by the individual disciple or his group are claimed by others, are the hallmarks of the hierarchical worker. Then he says, look, we started a lot of things, but you disciples get the credit and we don't care. Okay, so they've mastered this, and it talks about who pays the karma, but I'll leave that out of the picture for right now. There's a fourth factor, the cultivation of silence. Apparently this destructive factor has to do with speech, but it's kind of amusing. I think DK is pretty good here in his sense of humor. How we ask ourselves at times when the functioning of the ashram is under discussion, can we train our disciples to realize that essentially silence is not refraining from speech? Interesting. So many disciples seem to think it is, and that they have to learn not to talk if they hope to take initiation. I always I spent some time in some different groups, and everyone would walk around not talking to each other, you know, because that was the spiritual thing to do. But of course, that's pretty silly. Some would do a great deal better, he says, if they talked more than they do along the right lines. And the silence imposed in an ashram is refraining from certain lines of thought, the elimination of reverie, and the unwholesome use of the creative imagination. And so speech is stopped at its source. So those are the four eliminations that we have to go through even before we can begin to think about fulfilling Rule 11. Think about it, you know, if some of you have read the Rays and Initiations and the 14 rules there, and some people say that Alice Bailey is passé and what the Tibetan wrote was a long time ago, and come on, has anybody fulfilled those 14 rules? It's the rules for group work in the Aquarian age. So, you know, let's be realistic about this. So look, are we willing to do this groundwork until it really gets done? It is groundwork, but we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves, assuming that just because we reached a certain point in our conception of our discipleship that we don't have any more of these eliminations to go through. The 5 Ds and these 4 preparatory eliminations, the 4 modes of destruction. It does continue, and we can't really leave it behind. And even planetary logi have their task cut out before them. You know, they're not perfect. They're the imperfect gods. Even our solar god is not perfect, not like Sirius, and Sirius would look to something greater and say, not perfect, and always there have to be eliminations and preparations for the next stage. So all the way up to the top, we have to monitor ourselves and get rid of things that are in the way of the next revelation. You know, we learn about the Buddha, the Tibetan tells us, where would one hear about this? But, you know, through him, that when it came to his 6th initiation and the Great Enlightenment, which was also the great decision that he chose the path of earth service because of his love of humanity and his attachment to humanity, and it wasn't really his path at all. He calls it a most understandable sin. And then he relates that to the sin of the planetary logos back on the Moonchain days when the planetary logos got compassionate too fast and let the beast out of the bag, you know. And we've been suffering from that for a long time. So we have to understand that this process of eliminating what has to go is not just going to go away. We're going to stay with this for a long, long time, and we have to be willing to do it. So, and a long time away, how long does the universe last? Well, no time at all, and yet a long time. Okay, contain the paradox. So when, for us at least, the obstructions are removed within the realm of the personality, and, you know, later, the realm of the causal body, strange as that may seem to people like ourselves, then the next divine aspect will come pouring in, and that's going to be for us at least love and wisdom. So Let's all get rid of what's in the way. Okay, thank you.